The Arizona desert holds many secrets, but none quite like Thomas Redwater's. For 15 years, the Apache man had lived alone on his small homestead, the red dirt and endless sky his only companions. Until that evening, the woman appeared like a mirage at the edge of his property. Weary eyes, dusty clothes, a battered suitcase in one hand and two small children clutching the other. Her car had broken down miles back. They had walked for hours. There was nowhere else to go. Thomas studied them silently, his weathered face revealing nothing of the war raging inside him. Trust had cost him everything once. Would he let these strangers into his carefully guarded life? "One of you can stay," he finally said. "You decide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Sarah Blake stared at the man's weathered face, his words hanging in the dry desert air between them. One can stay. The impossible choice twisted in her chest like a knife. "Mama!" Emma's small hand tightened around hers. At 10, her daughter was old enough to understand the gravity of their situation. 7-year-old Michael pressed against her leg, silent as he'd been for months. For hours earlier, the 20-year-old station wagon that represented everything they owned besides the suitcase had shuddered its last breath. Black smoke billowed from under the hood as Sarah guided it to the shoulder of the empty highway. Miles from anywhere, the Arizona sun beating down mercilessly, she'd made the decision to walk. The road map showed a small property marker down a dirt access road. Their only hope. "We'll find somewhere else," Sarah said, her voice steadier than her legs. She tugged gently at the children, turning away from the small adobe house and the stone-faced man on its porch. The sun was setting, painting the desert in crimson and gold. They had maybe an hour of light left. No water, no food, no shelter. "Wait!" The man's voice was rough as if rarely used. Sarah paused but didn't turn, shielding the children with her body. 3 months of running had taught her caution. "I needed to see what you would choose." Something in his tone made her look back. Thomas Redwater stood tall against the fading light, his Apache features impossible to read. "The test wasn't what you think." "Test?" Anger flared briefly through her exhaustion. "Testing a mother's love for her children isn't a game." "Not a game." He stepped down from the porch. "A measure of character." Michael whimpered softly, pressing his face into her hip. Emma stood straight, her young face defiant despite her fear. "I've seen people choose themselves," Thomas continued. "Seen parents abandon children for less than shelter." He gestured toward the horizon. "Desert brings out truth in people." Sarah fought the trembling in her legs. "We'll go." "You passed." Thomas turned toward his house. "All 3 can stay. Tonight only. Small room in back. Water's limited. Food's simple." Emma looked up at Sarah, hope battling wariness in her eyes. Michael remained pressed against her, silent and still. "Why should we trust you?" Sarah asked. Thomas paused at the door. "Same reason I'm trusting you under my roof." He disappeared inside, leaving the door ajar. The broken-down station wagon stood miles behind them, a fitting monument to her former life. Overheated, smoking, and eventually abandoned. Just like her marriage. Just like the comfortable suburban existence that had hidden the truth for so many years. Sarah swallowed hard. The children's faces were dusty, their eyes exhausted. They had nowhere else to go, no other options before night fully claimed the desert. "Just tonight," she whispered to them, squeezing their hands. "We'll leave at first light." They crossed the threshold together, the old screen door creaking shut behind them. The suitcase bumped against Sarah's leg, a constant reminder of how little remained of their former life. Everything that mattered most was holding her hands, walking beside her into the dimly lit home of a stranger who just offered an impossible choice. And then, unexpectedly, a reprieve. Thomas moved silently through his kitchen, aware of the woman and children settling uncomfortably in his spare room. The small sounds of their whispers and movements disturbed the perfect quiet he'd cultivated for 15 years. He pulled an old military photo from the drawer beneath his coffee can. For men in desert camouflage stood arm in arm, mountains of Afghanistan rising behind them. He traced the faces with his weathered finger. "Should have left them out there, Jim," he murmured to the man standing next to him in the photo. "Too many ghosts already." But something in the woman's eyes had reached through his carefully constructed walls. Determination. Fierce protection. The same look Elena had worn when they'd found out she was pregnant. Thomas closed his eyes against the memory. Elena and their unborn child, gone in the same car accident that had taken his leg below the knee. The prosthetic ached in the cooling desert night, a phantom pain that never truly left. After Elena, there had been the military. After the military, there had been nothing but this small piece of reservation-adjacent land his grandfather had purchased decades ago. Land that had become both his sanctuary and his prison. From the back room, he heard the boy's muffled cry, then the mother's gentle shushing. The sound transported him back to nights in the barracks, young soldiers waking from nightmares they couldn't escape. Jim, Santos, and Kyle, his unit, his brothers, all gone now. The only ones who had understood what he'd seen and done. The woman, Sarah, she'd said her name was, had that same haunted look. Not from war, perhaps, but from some battlefield all the same. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "The Apache way is to help those who need it, Thomas. This modern world forgets, but we remember." Thomas had tried to forget those teachings, tried to close himself off from the pain of human connection. 15 years of solitude had been his answer to loss. Yet here he was, boiling extra water for coffee, setting out 3 more cups than usual. Something about the way the little girl had stood straight, chin up despite her fear, reminded him of his young niece before his sister had moved the family to Phoenix, tired of his isolation. The boy's silence spoke volumes to Thomas. He recognized trauma when he saw it. "Just for tonight," he assured himself, tucking the photo away. But as he measured coffee grounds, he found himself wondering if the spare room needed better curtains. If the leaky faucet might disturb their sleep. If the children might like the wooden animals he'd carved during long, empty evenings. The old wound in his heart, scarred over for years, throbbed with a dull, forgotten ache. Not quite pain, not quite hope, something in between. Outside, the desert wind picked up, swirling dust around the homestead. Thomas stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the horizon as they did every night. Checking, securing, a soldier's habits never quite abandoned. The broken-down car they described would need to be towed. Parts ordered. Days of work, at least. Days during which they would remain under his roof. Thomas took a deep breath of the cool night air. Tomorrow would reveal whether he'd made the biggest mistake since returning to civilian life, or whether his grandfather's wisdom had led him to exactly where he needed to be. Dinner was a silent affair. Thomas set out beans, rice, and tortillas on mismatched plates. Sarah helped the children wash their hands in the small bathroom, whispering reassurances that grew less convincing with each repetition. "Eat," Thomas said, the only word spoken as they gathered around his kitchen table. The chairs creaked under unaccustomed weight. Emma watched Thomas with undisguised curiosity while Michael stared at his plate, pushing beans around without eating. Sarah's eyes darted between her children, the door, and their reluctant host. When the meal ended, Thomas disappeared briefly into his bedroom, returning with a handmade quilt of vibrant colors that stood in stark contrast to the muted browns and grays of his home. "For tonight," he said, offering it to Sarah. Something in his hesitation told her this wasn't just any blanket. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. "Did you make it?" "Elena, my wife." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Sarah nodded, understanding. "We'll take good care of it." Thomas showed them to the small room at the back of the house. A single bed, a chair, a dresser. Sparse but clean. Bathrooms down the hall. Water's precious here. Short showers only. He pointed to a metal pitcher. Drinking water. Windows lock from inside. His eyes met Sarah's directly for the first time. You're safe here. After he left, Sarah helped the children prepare for bed, all three squeezing onto the narrow mattress, the quilt spread over them. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Mama, Emma whispered, is the man angry with us? Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. No, sweetheart. I think he's just forgotten how to be around people. Like Michael forgot how to talk? Sarah glanced at her son. His eyes closed, but his breathing too, even for sleep. Everyone heals differently. Michael's nightmares began around midnight. Soft whimpers escalated to thrashing movements. Sarah gathered him close, murmuring soothing words that couldn't reach wherever his mind had taken him. A soft knock at the door startled her. Thomas stood in the hallway, a glass of water in hand. Heard the boy, he said. My grandfather used to say night terrors need water to wash them away. Sarah accepted the glass, helping Michael sip between shuddering breaths. Thank you. Thomas nodded, turning to leave. You have them too, don't you? Sarah asked quietly. The nightmares. He paused, his back to her. Different dreams. Same monsters. Hours later, when Michael had finally settled, Sarah slipped out to use the bathroom. Passing the living room, she noticed Thomas sitting upright in an armchair, eyes open but unseeing. Bad night? She asked. His focus returned slowly. Most are. Sarah hesitated in the doorway. I've been running for 3 months. From my husband. Ex-husband now, I suppose. Thomas didn't respond, but his attention remained on her. He's a police detective. Has friends in neighboring counties. Resources. She twisted her hands together. He broke Michael's arm 6 months ago. That's when Michael stopped talking. Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'll have your car towed tomorrow, he said after a long silence. Parts might take time. Sarah recognized the unspoken offer. We won't impose more than necessary. This land has sheltered wounded things before. He looked toward the window where the desert night pressed against the glass. Healed some of them, too. Sarah returned to the small bedroom, sliding carefully between her children. Emma curled instinctively toward her warmth. Michael's hand found hers in sleep. Beneath them, Elena's quilt held them like a promise. Dawn arrived with the gentle persistence of gold spreading across the horizon. Thomas had been awake for hours, his morning ritual unchanged despite the new presences in his home. Coffee brewed, bread toasted. The generator hummed outside, providing the modest electricity his solar panels couldn't supply on cloudy days. He stood on the porch, watching the sun climb. 15 years of identical mornings disrupted by 3 unexpected variables. The thought should have troubled him more than it did. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Sarah emerged, hair damp from a quick shower, borrowed clothes hanging loose on her frame. I didn't want to wake the children yet, she said, her voice low. They need the rest. Thomas offered a mug of coffee without comment. She accepted, wrapping both hands around its warmth despite the already rising temperature. Your home is beautiful, she said after a silence. Peaceful. Thomas nodded, his eyes scanning the red rocks and scrubby vegetation that comprised his view. Most people see emptiness. I see sanctuary. Her words hung between them, weighted with unspoken history. The tow truck arrived mid-morning, dust billowing behind its wheels. The children watched from the window as Thomas directed the driver to their car's location. Emma's face pressed against the glass while Michael hung back, his small shoulders tense. When Thomas returned, Emma met him at the door. Is our car coming back? Thomas looked down at her, momentarily disarmed by direct address. Yes. We'll need work, though. Can we see your workshop? Emma pointed to the small outbuilding visible from the kitchen window. Mom says we have to ask permission before going anywhere. Sarah appeared behind her daughter. Emma, Mr. Redwater has his privacy. It's fine, Thomas interrupted. Not much to see. Just projects. He led them across the yard, his slight limp more pronounced in the uneven terrain. The workshop door opened to reveal an unexpectedly organized space. Tools hung on pegboards. Wood in various stages of carving filled a long workbench. Finished pieces, animals, figures, intricate boxes, lined shelves along one wall. Emma gasped. You made all these? Thomas nodded, watching as she approached a carved eagle, wings extended in flight. They're beautiful, Sarah said, her fingers hovering near a small wooden horse. You're an artist. Just passes time, Thomas replied, though something in his posture eased at their appreciation. Michael had remained near the door, but his eyes were fixed on a half-finished carving, a small boy sitting with a dog. Thomas noticed his attention. Like dogs. Michael didn't answer, but he took a small step forward. Had one as a boy, Thomas continued, speaking to the room rather than directly to Michael. Apache shepherd mix. Smartest animal I ever knew. For the first time, Michael's eyes lifted to Thomas's face, a fleeting connection before returning to the carving. Back at the house, Thomas established boundaries, areas where the children could explore safely, limits to water usage, daily routines they should observe. Sarah listened intently, mentally calculating how to adapt their presence to minimize disruption. Your car, Thomas said finally. Jimmy will look at it today. Parts might take time from Phoenix. We have some money, Sarah began, but Thomas shook his head. Jimmy owes me. His tone discouraged further discussion. Later, as Sarah helped prepare lunch, she watched Thomas through the window. He walked the perimeter of his property with the vigilance of someone accustomed to maintaining barriers. Yet he had let them in, not just into his home but into his workshop, a space clearly private and personal. The wooden carvings had revealed something the man himself kept carefully hidden. Emma sidled up beside her at the window. I like it here, Mom. Sarah put an arm around her daughter's shoulders. It's just temporary, sweetheart. But as Thomas turned back toward the house, his eyes meeting hers through the glass, Sarah wondered what temporary might come to mean in this place where time seemed to move by different rules. The station wagon arrived the following day, hoisted onto Jimmy's flatbed and deposited near Thomas's workshop. The sight of it, faded blue paint, dents marking its journey, made Sarah's throat tighten. Their getaway car. Their home for weeks of campgrounds and parking lots. Their last connection to a life she'd never return to. Radiators shot, Jimmy informed them, wiping greasy hands on a rag. Hoses, belts, water pump too. Engines salvageable though. Thomas surveyed the damage. Parts. Week, maybe 2 for delivery. Summer backlog. Jimmy glanced at Sarah. Thomas'll get her running. Best mechanic on the reservation. After Jimmy left, Thomas lifted the hood, methodically cataloging needed repairs. Sarah stood beside him, surprising him with knowledgeable questions. My father was a mechanic, she explained, catching his look. I helped in his shop growing up. Thomas handed her a wrench. Start on the bolts there. They worked side by side, the easy rhythm of tools passing between them requiring few words. By mid-afternoon, the radiator lay on the ground, and Thomas had a comprehensive parts list. Inside the house, Emma had appointed herself helper, carefully washing breakfast dishes. Michael sat at the table, a blank paper and colored pencils before him, untouched. Found these in the drawer, Emma explained when Sarah came to check on them. Is it okay, Mr. Thomas? He nodded, surprising Sarah by addressing the boy directly. Used to draw when I was about your age. Michael's eyes flickered up briefly before returning to the blank page. After lunch, Sarah retrieved her sketchbook from the suitcase, a simple spiral-bound notebook, half-filled with pencil drawings. Sitting on the porch steps, she began sketching the landscape, the familiar action steadying her nerves. Thomas emerged from the workshop and paused, watching over her shoulder. "You're good," he said simply. Sarah angled the book so he could see better. "Just capturing memories." He glanced through the open pages, desert highways, rest stops, the children sleeping in the back of the station wagon. A visual diary of their escape. "Never had formal training," she continued, shading the distant mountains. "Mark, my ex, thought it was a waste of time. Most important things seem like waste to wrong people." Thomas's voice carried the weight of experience. Later, Thomas found Emma in his workshop, respectfully examining his tools without touching. "Can you teach me to make things?" she asked boldly. Thomas considered her for a long moment. "Start simple," he finally said, selecting a small piece of pine and a knife with a rounded tip. "Safety first." He demonstrated basic whittling techniques, guiding her hands with unexpected gentleness. Sarah watched from the doorway, a complex emotion catching in her chest at the sight of her daughter's rapt attention and Thomas's patient instruction. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah joined Thomas on the porch. Stars punctured the velvet darkness, more brilliant than she'd ever seen in the city. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "if we're going to be here while the car's repaired, I'd like to contribute. I noticed your vegetable garden needs attention. I could help with that, maybe cooking too." Thomas nodded once. Fair exchange. Sarah pulled her sketchbook from her pocket. In the dim porch light, she showed him a drawing she'd done that afternoon. Thomas and Emma in the workshop, heads bent together over the wood. "I thought you might like to have this," she said, "when we're gone." Thomas accepted the drawing, studying it with a complicated expression. "Keep it for now," he finally said, returning it to her. "Story's not finished yet." As Sarah returned to the small bedroom, Emma stirred sleepily. "Are we staying, Mama?" Sarah brushed her daughter's hair back. "For a little while." "Good," Emma murmured, drifting back to sleep. "I think Mr. Thomas is lonely." Sarah glanced toward the closed door, beyond which Thomas still sat on the porch, staring at stars. "I think you might be right." A week passed in the rhythm of desert days. Sarah's hands grew calloused from garden work, Emma's from wood-carving lessons. Michael remained silent but had begun following Thomas at a distance, watching his movements with careful attention. The station wagon stood partially dismantled, parts on order from Phoenix. Thomas and Sarah worked on it during the cooler mornings, their movements synchronizing with growing familiarity. It was during one of these sessions that Thomas straightened suddenly, his eyes fixed on the distant road. "Inside," he said, voice sharp with urgency. "All of you." Sarah followed his gaze. A black SUV had turned onto the access road, dust billowing behind its wheels. "Mark," she whispered, blood draining from her face. "He found us." Thomas guided her firmly toward the house. "Get the children. Back room. Lock the door." Inside, Sarah gathered Emma and Michael with shaking hands, herding them to the bedroom. Emma's questions tumbled over one another while Michael's eyes widened with wordless terror. "Someone's coming to visit Mr. Thomas," Sarah explained, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We need to stay quiet for a little while." Through the small window, she watched Thomas position himself on the porch, arms crossed, a sentinel between the approaching vehicle and her children. The SUV stopped at the edge of the property. Two men emerged. Neither was Mark, but Sarah recognized the passenger. Detective Paul Reese, her husband's partner and closest ally on the force. Sarah's chest constricted. She couldn't breathe. Memories flooded back. Mark's hand around her throat, his badge tossed on the nightstand, his whispered threats about what would happen if she ever tried to leave. Michael whimpered, pressing against her. His small body trembled violently, recognizing her fear even without seeing its source. Outside, Thomas stood immovable as the men approached. "Looking for a woman and 2 kids," she heard Reese say. "Blue station wagon. Might have broken down around here." "Lot of cars break down in the desert," Thomas replied, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Lot of people passing through." "This is a police matter," Reese continued. "Domestic situation. Husband's worried sick." "No domestic situations here," Thomas answered. "Just me." The second man stepped forward. "Mind if we look around?" "Yes." Thomas's response was immediate. "Tribal land adjacent. You need permission or a warrant." "You have neither." Sarah held her breath. Mark had taught her exactly how officers could circumvent such restrictions when they wanted to. Reese tried another approach. "If you see them, call this number. Woman's unstable. Kids aren't safe with her." Even from a distance, Sarah could see Thomas's posture stiffen. "Been out here 15 years, he said. "No dangerous when I see it. Doesn't usually come with children." The confrontation continued for several more minutes before the men reluctantly returned to their vehicle. Sarah watched it disappear back toward the highway, her legs finally giving out as she sank to the floor. When Thomas knocked softly on the bedroom door, she was still sitting there, children clutched tightly against her. "They're gone," he said. "For now." Sarah looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I've put you in danger." "They don't know you're here," Thomas interrupted. "But they're looking. Smart to assume they'll be back." That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah told Thomas everything. Mark's escalating abuse hidden behind his respected detective's badge, his connections throughout regional law enforcement, the night she'd finally fled when he turned his violence toward Emma. "He'll never stop looking," she concluded, voice hollow. "He told me once he'd rather see us dead than gone." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "My grandfather said there are 2 wolves inside every person. One is fear. One is courage. The one that grows stronger is the one you feed." Sarah stared into the darkness beyond the window. "I've been feeding the fear wolf for years." "Not anymore." Thomas's voice was firm. "You ran. You protected your children. That's the courage wolf." He stood, decision made. "You'll stay here while we figure this out. Car won't be ready anyway." "He's dangerous, Thomas." "So was I once." Thomas touched the military photo on the shelf briefly. "Some things you don't forget." As he moved toward his room, Sarah called after him softly. "Why are you helping us?" Thomas paused, his silhouette framed in the hallway. "Because no one helped Elena when she needed it." The black SUV had brought more than just the threat of discovery. It had brought clarity to what had been building between them. A fragile alliance forged in shared understanding of pain and the unexpected possibility of healing. The threat of discovery changed the atmosphere at the homestead. Thomas increased his vigilance, checking the road several times daily. Sarah kept the children closer, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Yet paradoxically, the shared danger created a new openness between them. 3 days after the SUV's visit, Thomas emerged from his room carrying a small buckskin bundle tied with sinew. "My grandfather's," he explained, setting it carefully on the kitchen table. "Medicine bundle." Emma approached cautiously. "What's inside?" "Sacred items. Things that hold power." Thomas untied the bundle with reverent hands. "Apache believes certain objects carry medicine. Not like pills, but spiritual strength." Sarah watched from the doorway as Thomas revealed the contents. An eagle feather, stones of various colors, a small carved wooden figure, dried herbs tied with fiber. "Each item has purpose, meaning," he continued, his voice taking on a cadence Sarah hadn't heard before. "Eagle feather for wisdom and vision. White stone for clarity. Red for strength." "Can I touch them?" Emma asked. "Some," Thomas replied, selecting the white stone and placing it in her palm. Hold it to your forehead when your thoughts are jumbled. Even Michael had drawn closer, his eyes fixed on the mysterious objects. Medicine bundle is personal, Thomas explained. Built over lifetime. Holds your journey. He looked directly at Michael, offering a smooth black stone. Obsidian. For protection. After a moment's hesitation, Michael reached out, accepting the stone. His fingers closed around it tightly. Later that morning, Thomas led them along a narrow trail behind the house. Desert seems empty to outsiders, he said as they walked. Full of life if you know how to look. He pointed out medicinal plants, edible cacti, signs of animals invisible to untrained eyes. He showed them how to find water by reading the landscape, how to navigate using natural markers. Why are you teaching us all this? Sarah asked when the children had moved ahead to examine a jackrabbit's tracks. Knowledge is survival, Thomas replied simply. Desert doesn't forgive ignorance. The unspoken implication hung between them. If they needed to flee again, these skills might save their lives. That evening, Thomas built a small fire in a pit behind the house. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces as they gathered around its warmth. Apache children learn through stories, Thomas said, arranging stones in a pattern beside the fire. Stories teach without preaching. He began to speak, his voice finding a rhythm that transformed him. He told of Coyote and his tricks, of mountain spirit dancers who healed the sick, of the first woman who brought wisdom to the people. Emma listened with rapt attention. Michael sat motionless, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Even Sarah found herself drawn into the ancient narratives that seemed to rise from the very land beneath them. When Thomas finished, silence held them for several heartbeats. Your turn, he finally said, nodding to Sarah. She hesitated. I don't know any stories like yours. Tell your stories, your traditions. Sarah thought for a moment, then began sharing childhood memories, holiday celebrations, her grandmother's recipes, bedtime rituals from when Emma and Michael were babies. Emma joined in, describing birthday parties and school plays. To everyone's surprise, Michael suddenly pointed to the fire, then made a sweeping gesture with his hands. Marshmallows, Emma translated excitedly. He's talking about camping with Dad before. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at this small breakthrough. Yes, we used to toast marshmallows. Thomas nodded approvingly. Good memories worth keeping. Bad ones worth learning from. As the fire burned down to embers, Emma asked, Can we do this again tomorrow? Stories need time to settle, Thomas replied. But yes, different stories tomorrow. Later, Sarah found Thomas on the porch, staring at the stars. Thank you, she said, sitting beside him. I haven't seen Michael respond to anything like that since. Children understand more than we think, Thomas interrupted gently. Stories help them make sense of hard things. Is that why you told them? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Told them for myself too. Been a long time since I shared those stories. They're meant to be spoken, not held inside. Sarah realized that in teaching her children about his heritage, Thomas was reclaiming parts of himself long abandoned. Stories keep people alive who are gone, he added softly. My grandfather, Elena, your children's memories of better times. Under the vast desert sky, their separate histories seemed to weave together into something new, a shared narrative neither had anticipated. The parts for the station wagon arrived piecemeal over the following days. Thomas and Sarah worked steadily, rebuilding the cooling system component by component. Their hands moved in tandem, passing tools without words, a silent choreography that spoke of growing comfort. Where will you go? Thomas asked one morning as they fitted the new radiator. When it's finished. Sarah paused, the question catching her off guard. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival, and the future remained a hazy uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted. Somewhere he can't find us. somewhere to start over. With what? Thomas's question wasn't unkind, merely practical. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of grease. I have some money saved. Not much. Enough for a few months in a small place, maybe. Thomas tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. And then, I'll find work. I always have. They continued working in silence, the question of departure hanging between them like the desert heat. That afternoon, Sarah discovered an old recipe card tucked in a kitchen drawer while searching for a measuring cup. Faded handwriting detailed instructions for Elena's Chili, Colorado. I found this, she said when Thomas returned from checking the property perimeter. I could make it if you want. A thank you for everything. Thomas stared at the card, emotions crossing his face too quickly to read. Been a long time. I understand if you'd rather I didn't. No, he interrupted. Make it, please. Sarah prepared the dish carefully, following Elena's precise instructions. The kitchen filled with the rich aroma of chilies and slow-cooked beef. Emma helped, measuring spices and stirring when instructed. Even Michael hovered nearby, watching the transformation of ingredients with cautious interest. When Thomas took his first bite at dinner, he closed his eyes briefly. Tastes like home, he said simply. Mom makes the best food, Emma declared. She used to bake cakes for people and they paid her money. Thomas looked at Sarah questioningly. Just a small business from our kitchen, she explained. Specialty cakes, pastries. Nothing fancy. She had to stop because Dad said it was embarrassing. Emma continued, oblivious to her mother's discomfort. He said police wives don't sell stuff from home. Emma, Sarah warned gently. It was dumb, Emma persisted. Mom's cakes were amazing. People loved them. What people love often threatens small minds, Thomas observed, serving himself another portion. Later, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Thomas sat on the porch, the night air cooling around them. Your wife was a good cook, Sarah said. Among many things. Thomas's voice softened with memory. Teacher, painter, dreamed of opening a preschool on the reservation. What happened? Sarah asked, then added quickly, if you don't mind telling me. Drunk driver. Crossed the center line. His words were measured, practiced from years of containing the pain. I was driving. Woke up in hospital. Lost my leg. Lost Elena. Lost our unborn son. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. I'm so sorry, Thomas. He didn't pull away. 15 years ago next month. They sat in silence, connected by shared understanding of how quickly life could shatter. The car will be finished soon, Thomas finally said. Maybe another week. Sarah nodded, a complicated emotion rising in her chest. We should start planning where to go. Thomas turned to face her, his features barely visible in the moonlight. Or you could stay. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Thomas. Not asking anything, he clarified quickly. Property has old foundation beyond the workshop. My grandfather's original house. Could build something small. Your own place. Safe for the children. Why would you do that? Thomas looked out at the dark landscape. Place this big shouldn't be so empty. Sarah thought of the repaired car, symbol of their intended departure, of the uncertain future waiting beyond Thomas's protected boundaries, of Emma's growing attachment to this place and Michael's fragile progress. I need to think about it, she said finally. Thomas nodded, understanding. No rush. Car's not going anywhere tonight. As if by mutual agreement, they continued sitting together, watching the stars while overhead, neither wanting to be the first to break the connection that had formed between them. Tentative as a desert bloom, yet surprisingly resilient. The storm came without warning. One moment, stars scattered across the night sky. The next, thunderheads rolled in from the mountains, swallowing the moonlight. Wind howled around the corners of the house, rattling windows and whisking dust into small tornadoes across the yard. "Monsoon season," Thomas explained, securing the workshop doors as rain began to fall in heavy sheets. "Flash floods possible. Best stay inside." They huddled in the living room as electricity flickered, then failed completely. Thomas lit kerosene lamps that cast wavering shadows on the walls. Outside, lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, followed by thunder that shook the foundation. Michael pressed against Sarah, trembling. Emma tried for bravery but flinched at each thunderclap. "It's okay," Sarah soothed, though her own nerves frayed as the storm's ferocity increased. "Just weather." Thomas disappeared briefly into his bedroom, returning with a small, handcrafted drum. "Apache tradition," he said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "During storms, we tell stories. Remind ourselves we've survived worse." He began a gentle rhythm on the drum, its steady beat a counterpoint to the storm's chaos. The children's attention shifted from the raging elements to the hypnotic sound. "Long ago," Thomas began, his voice finding the storyteller's cadence. "First man and first woman faced a great flood. Water covered everything. They thought all was lost." Emma edged closer. Even Michael's trembling subsided slightly. "But they were resourceful. They made a vessel from reeds. They gathered seeds of every plant. They saved what was precious." The drumbeat continued, steady as a heartbeat. "When waters receded, they planted those seeds. Life returned. From disaster came renewal." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white. In that instant, Sarah saw Thomas not as the solitary man she'd first met, but as a keeper of something ancient and vital. "Your turn," Thomas said, offering the drum to Emma. "What story helps you through storms?" Emma hesitated, then accepted the drum, experimenting with its sound. "Mom used to sing to us during thunderstorms back home," she said, "about a brave little boat." "Show us," Thomas encouraged. Emma began tapping the drum awkwardly, finding a simple rhythm. Sarah smiled and started singing the familiar lullaby about a small vessel weathering high seas. Her voice, rusty from disuse, gained strength with each verse. To everyone's astonishment, Michael suddenly extended his hand toward the drum. Emma surrendered it, and he began a more complex pattern, his small fingers finding rhythms no one had taught him. "He remembers," Sarah whispered, tears mingling with her smile. "He played percussion in kindergarten. His teacher said he had natural talent." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Music speaks when words can't." As the storm raged outside, they took turns with the drum, each sharing something. A story, a song, a memory. The kerosene lamps burned low, casting their faces in amber light. "Your turn again," Emma said to Thomas. He thought for a moment, then began a low, melodic chant in Apache. The sound filled the room, weaving around them like a protective spell. "What does it mean?" Sarah asked when he finished. "Prayer for protection, for safe passage through darkness." His eyes met hers across the lamplight. "For finding home when lost." Michael, still holding the drum, suddenly spoke, his first words in months. "Again," he said, voice scratchy from disuse. "Please." The room froze in stunned silence. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely. Thomas, recovering first, nodded solemnly to Michael and began the chant again. Michael's small hands found the rhythm on the drum, accompanying the unfamiliar words with perfect timing. Sarah couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the sound of her son's voice after so many silent months. Emma squeezed her hand tightly, her own eyes wide with wonder. The storm continued through the night, but its power over them had diminished. In the shared warmth of stories and music, they had created something stronger than fear. Dawn revealed the storm's aftermath: branches down, garden flooded, and most significantly, the nearly completed station wagon partially crushed by a fallen cottonwood limb. Thomas surveyed the damage, Sarah beside him in the mud-slicked yard. "Another delay," he said, meeting her eyes. Sarah looked back at the house, where Emma and Michael were examining a desert tortoise that had sought shelter on their porch. "Maybe it's a sign," she replied softly. For the first time since they'd met, Thomas smiled. A brief, transformative expression that reached his eyes. Apache believe in signs. The fallen tree limb had crushed the station wagon's roof and shattered its windshield. Parts would need to be ordered again, delaying repairs by weeks. Though neither Sarah nor Thomas mentioned it, a subtle shift had occurred. The urgency to leave had diminished, replaced by an unspoken question about staying. 3 days after the storm, Thomas asked Sarah to join him on a walk. They followed a path leading away from the house, past the workshop to an area Sarah hadn't yet explored. The children remained behind, Emma teaching Michael to carve simple patterns into wood scraps under the shade of the porch. "Wanted to show you something," Thomas said as they crested a small rise. Below them lay a flat clearing. Stone foundation walls, weathered but solid, formed the outline of what had once been a small house. "My grandfather's original home," Thomas explained. "Built it himself when he purchased this land in the 1950s. Sarah walked along the foundation, running her fingers over the sun-warmed stones. "What happened to it?" "Fire before I was born." He rebuilt closer to the well. Thomas gestured toward their current residence. "This foundation is still good. Plumbing lines still run here." A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the stillness. Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, offering it to Sarah. "Land deed," he said as she opened it. 15 acres. All mine. No mortgage. Sarah studied the legal paper, uncertain why he was showing her this. "Been thinking," Thomas continued, his voice careful. "Foundation could support a small house. 2 bedrooms. Simple but solid." Sarah looked up, realization dawning. "Thomas, for you and the children," he clarified quickly. "Your own place. Privacy. Independence. But close enough for—" He hesitated. "For safety." Sarah stared at the foundation stones, imagining walls rising from them. "A home. Their home." "I can't ask you to do that," she said finally. "Not asking. Offering." Thomas looked toward the distant horizon. "Land this big shouldn't be wasted on one person." "And what would we be to each other?" Sarah asked, the question direct but necessary. "Neighbors first." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Rest would be up to time. No pressure. No obligations." Sarah walked the perimeter of the foundation, thinking, "Mark will keep searching. Having us here puts you at risk." "Been at risk before. Survived." Thomas's jaw set with determination. "This land is sovereign adjacent. Complicated jurisdiction. Hard for him to operate here without tribal authorities involved." Sarah thought of Michael's first words during the storm, of Emma's blossoming interest in Apache culture, of the peace she herself had found in this harsh but beautiful landscape. "I don't have money to build a house," she said finally. "Have savings. Never spent military benefits." Thomas shrugged. "Money does no good sitting in bank." "I couldn't. Consider it loan. Pay back when you can." His expression softened slightly. "Children need stability. Safe place to heal." Sarah's thoughts raced. The practical arrangements. The implications. The complex emotions evolving between herself and this solitary man who had unexpectedly opened his world to them. "What about your privacy? Your solitude?" she asked. "That's why you live out here, isn't it?" 15 years is long time to be alone, Thomas admitted. "Maybe too long." A lizard darted across the foundation stones, disappearing into a crevice. Sarah watched its path, thinking of her own flight, her own hiding. "I need to consider the children," she said. "Their safety, their future." "Of course." And I'd need to find work eventually. Contribute. Thomas nodded. Town's 30 minutes away. Jobs there. Where you could bake again. Sell at reservation market. The thought of resuming her small business sent an unexpected thrill through Sarah. Mark had deemed it embarrassing, beneath the dignity of a detective's wife. His voice had overshadowed her dreams for so long. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Take all you need. Thomas gestured back toward the house where the children played. No rush to decide. As they walked back, Sarah found herself imagining a small house rising from the old foundation. A garden plot. Perhaps a workshop of her own someday. Dangerous thoughts, perhaps. Hope always carried risk. One more thing, Thomas said as they neared the homestead. Whatever you decide, you have my word. I'll help you stay safe from him, even if you choose to go elsewhere. Sarah stopped, touched by the simple, powerful promise. Thank you. Thomas nodded once, then continued walking, leaving Sarah to follow when she was ready. The sound of an approaching vehicle put everyone on alert. Thomas was outside before the dust cloud reached the driveway, positioning himself protectively between the house and the approaching truck. Sarah ushered the children to the back bedroom, heart pounding. Stay here until I come get you. She moved to the window, watching as a weathered pickup truck came to a stop. The man who emerged wore a tan uniform with a tribal police badge gleaming on his chest. Thomas's posture relaxed slightly, though his vigilance remained evident. Joe, Thomas greeted, extending his hand. Thomas. The officer clasped his hand firmly. Been a while. Sarah slipped outside, staying on the porch, close enough to retreat quickly if necessary. Thomas noticed her and beckoned. Sarah, this is Joe Nakai, tribal police. Served together in Afghanistan. Only friend who didn't give up on me after he decided to become a desert hermit. Joe finished with a wry smile. His eyes assessed Sarah with professional attention. Ms. Blake. Sarah froze. How do you know my name? Joe unclipped a small notebook from his belt. That's why I'm here. Sarah Blake, 2 children, Emma and Michael. Missing persons report filed in Phoenix 3 months ago by husband, Detective Mark Blake. Thomas moved closer to Sarah. Joe, what's this about? Joe glanced between them. Someone's been asking questions at the trading post. White man, city clothes, showing photos. Not the first place he's tried. Mark, Sarah whispered. Your husband's got reach, Joe continued, flipping pages in his notebook. Got friends across 3 counties, according to my sources. Been making calls to departments near the reservation. He's not my husband anymore, Sarah said, finding her voice. I filed for divorce before I left. He broke my son's arm. There are hospital records. Joe nodded. Figured it was something like that. Man doesn't chase his family this hard unless he's either desperate with worry or desperate for control. The second one, Sarah confirmed. Joe turned to Thomas. You know what you're getting into, brother? Thomas's expression remained impassive. Already in it. The officer sighed, removing his hat to wipe his brow. Then you should know Blake's got connections. Federal contacts too. Been telling people his wife's unstable. Kidnapped the kids. Might harm them. Sarah's legs weakened. That's not true. I believe you, Joe assured her. But his badge carries weight. Thomas invited them inside, where Joe spread several papers on the kitchen table. The children remained in the back room, though Sarah suspected Emma was listening from the hallway. Blake's filed for emergency custody, Joe explained, pointing to court documents. Judge hasn't ruled yet, but with his connections. Sarah stared at the papers, the legal language blurring before her eyes. He'll take my children. Not if we prevent it, Thomas said firmly. Joe raised an eyebrow at the we, but continued. There are options. Tribal jurisdiction creates complications for outside law enforcement. And I have friends at the women's shelter in Standing Rock. I'm not running again, Sarah said, surprising herself with her conviction. My children need stability. Joe studied her with newfound respect. Then you fight. Legally. County seat has victim advocacy office. Domestic violence resources. Mark controls the narrative in Phoenix, Sarah argued. He's a decorated detective. Who would believe me? Court records, Joe replied, tapping his notebook. Hospital visit for Michael's arm. Documentation is power. Thomas, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke. Blake came out here himself once, disguised as power company worker. I didn't realize until after Joe showed me his photo. He was surveying the property. Sarah gasped. When? 2 weeks ago, before you arrived. Asking about access roads, nearby residents. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He's planning something. Joe's hand moved instinctively to his badge. I'll increase patrols. Alert tribal council. I should leave, Sarah whispered. Put you all at risk. Running gives him power, Joe countered. Staying, fighting back. That's how you win. Thomas placed his hand over the papers on the table. Joe and I won't let him take your children. This is Apache land. We protect our own. The simple declaration hung in the air. Sarah looked at Thomas, seeing the warrior beneath the quiet exterior. I'll help you file counter-documents, Joe offered. Restraining order. Abuse allegations. Everything official. It might not be enough, Sarah said. Maybe not alone, Joe agreed. But you're not alone anymore. As Joe prepared to leave, he handed Thomas something that glinted in the light. A second badge. Tribal Auxiliary Deputy, he explained. Still valid from when you consulted on the Davis case. Might be useful if official visitors come around. Thomas accepted it silently, the weight of responsibility evident in his expression. Thank you, Sarah said as Joe returned to his truck. Don't thank me yet, the officer replied. Storm's coming. Best be ready when it hits. As the truck disappeared down the road, Sarah turned to Thomas. I'm putting everyone in danger by staying. Already decided that risk is worth taking, Thomas answered simply. Joe's warning galvanized them into action. Thomas approached Sarah the next morning, a notebook filled with precise handwriting in hand. Security assessment, he explained, laying out a methodical plan for protecting the property. Military habits die hard. Over the following days, they implemented his strategies. Thomas installed new locks on doors and windows. Motion-activated lights appeared at strategic points around the perimeter. The workshop was reorganized to provide clearer sightlines to the access road. During this work, Thomas retrieved a locked case from beneath his bed. Inside lay a hunting rifle, meticulously maintained despite years of disuse. Standard issue Remington 700, he explained, checking the action with practiced hands. From my hunting days. Sarah watched him handle the weapon with military precision. I hope we don't need that. Hope is good. Preparation is better. Thomas positioned the rifle in a concealed but accessible location. Knowledge is power. You should learn to handle it safely. That afternoon, he took Sarah behind the property, setting up cans on a distant ridge. With patient instruction, he taught her the fundamentals of marksmanship, stance, breathing, trigger control. I never thought I'd be learning to shoot, Sarah admitted between rounds. Apache women were warriors too when needed, Thomas replied. No shame in protecting what's yours. The children were included in preparations appropriate to their ages. Thomas taught them emergency protocols, where to hide, which neighbors to run to if necessary. Like a fire drill, Sarah explained to ease their anxiety. Just in case. Michael, speaking more each day though still in single words and short phrases, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Emma asked pointed questions that revealed her awareness of the danger posed by their father. Will he try to take us away? she asked one evening as Sarah tucked her in. Some people might come and ask questions, Sarah answered carefully. But Thomas and Joe are helping us make sure you stay safe. I don't want to go with Dad, Emma whispered. He hurts people. Sarah held her daughter close. I know, sweetheart. I won't let that happen. While Thomas focused on physical security, Sarah worked with Joe on legal protections. They gathered medical records documenting Michael's broken arm and earlier accidents. Sarah's detailed journals of Mark's escalating abuse were transformed into official statements. Joe arranged for a victim advocate from the county seat to visit. Ms. Reynolds arrived with folders of resources and an unwavering determination to help. Detective Blake has influence, she acknowledged after reviewing their case. But he's made enemies too. People who've seen his temper, witnessed his methods. She helped Sarah file for an emergency protection order, carefully documenting the pattern of stalking across state lines. This jurisdictional complexity actually works in our favor, Ms. Reynolds explained. His authority is weaker here, especially with tribal involvement. As legal preparations progressed, Thomas received unexpected support from his extended family on the reservation. His cousin David, a construction contractor, visited to assess the old foundation. Could have a simple frame-up in a week, he told Thomas after inspecting the site. Longer for finishing work, but it would be secure. Sarah overheard this conversation from the porch, realizing Thomas was proceeding with plans for their permanent residence despite the current uncertainty. Other tribal members began appearing, an elder bringing traditional medicines for protection, women delivering food and offering childcare, men who quietly joined Thomas in patrolling the property boundaries. Your family has embraced us, Sarah said one evening as they watched the sunset. Apache understand family beyond blood, Thomas replied. Community protects its own. Why would they consider us their own? Thomas was silent for a moment. Because I asked for help. First time in 15 years. The significance of this admission settled between them. Sarah realized that in protecting her family, Thomas was reconnecting with his own. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found Thomas on the porch, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Are you afraid? She asked, sitting beside him. Cautious, he corrected. Mark Blake is desperate man. Desperate men make mistakes. That's what worries me. Thomas reassembled the weapon with practiced efficiency. In military, we controlled fear by preparing for worst while working for best. And what's the best outcome here? Thomas's hands stilled. You and children safe, free from fear, building new life. He hesitated. Here, if you choose. The rifle gleamed in the porch light, a stark reminder of the threat looming over them. Yet in its presence, Sarah felt strangely calm, not because of the weapon itself, but because of the steady hands that held it. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was hanging laundry while Thomas worked on the foundation site. The children were with David's wife on the reservation, a precautionary measure they'd implemented after Joe's latest intelligence suggested Mark was closing in. The convoy of vehicles appeared without warning, a black SUV leading, followed by a county sheriff's cruiser and an unmarked sedan. Dust billowed behind them as they approached. Thomas was at Sarah's side within moments. Inside, he directed calmly. Call Joe. Use the phrase we practiced. Sarah hurried to the phone while Thomas positioned himself on the porch, auxiliary badge visible on his belt, his stance relaxed but alert. Through the window, Sarah watched as the vehicles parked. From the SUV emerged the man who had haunted her nightmares for months. Mark Blake stood tall in his designer sunglasses and expensive casual clothes, the image of a concerned father rather than the monster she knew him to be. Where are my children, Sarah? His voice carried across the yard as he approached the porch, ignoring Thomas completely. Sarah stepped outside, legal papers clutched in her hand. Her legs trembled, but her voice remained steady. They're safe from you. Mark's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. This has gone on long enough. I've been patient, understanding of your issues. He gestured to the sheriff. I have emergency custody papers. Signed by Judge Holloway. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but held out an official document. Ma'am, I'm required to. This property borders tribal land, Thomas interrupted. Jurisdiction is complicated here. He displayed his auxiliary badge. And there's an active protection order against Detective Blake. For the first time, Mark acknowledged Thomas. Stay out of this. This is between me and my wife. Ex-wife, Sarah corrected, stepping forward with her own paperwork. And this protection order says you need to stay at least 500 feet from me and my children. Mark's facade cracked slightly. Paperwork can be challenged. Judges can be persuaded. So can witnesses, came a new voice. Joe pulled up in his tribal police truck, 2 additional officers with him. Detective Blake, you're outside your jurisdiction. Sarah watched the subtle shift in power as more vehicles arrived. Ms. Reynolds from Victim Advocacy, Thomas's cousin David with several other tribal members, and finally, a woman in a crisp suit who introduced herself as a representative from the state attorney's office. We've been investigating several complaints about Detective Blake's conduct, she explained, approaching the growing group, including witness intimidation and evidence tampering. Mark's confident expression faltered. This is ridiculous. I'm here for my children. The children you abused? Sarah's voice grew stronger, months of fear transforming into resolve. The son whose arm you broke? The daughter you terrorized? Those children. Mark stepped toward her menacingly. You've always been dramatic, Sarah. Always exaggerating. Thomas moved between them. That's close enough. Mark smiled coldly. Playing house with the local help. Sarah, is that what this is about? This is about the safety of 2 children, Joe interjected, and a pattern of documented abuse. The attorney held up a file. We have subpoenaed hospital records for Michael Blake. 3 suspicious injuries in 2 years. We have witness statements from neighbors who heard and saw concerning behavior. And we have your own precinct's domestic call records that were conveniently misfiled. Mark's expression hardened as he realized the gathering opposition. This isn't over. Actually, it is, the attorney continued. The protection order is valid. Additionally, I'm serving you with this. She handed him another document. The department is placing you on administrative leave pending investigation. Mark stared at the paper, rage building visibly. You have no idea who you're dealing with. A man who beats his wife and breaks his son's arm? Thomas said quietly. I know exactly who we're dealing with. For a tense moment, Sarah feared Mark might become violent. Instead, he crumpled the papers in his fist and pointed at her. You've made a serious mistake. My only mistake was not leaving sooner, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The standoff stretched until finally Mark turned away, stalking back to his SUV. The sheriff, clearly conflicted, apologized awkwardly before following. As the vehicles departed, Sarah's legs finally gave way. Thomas caught her arm, supporting her weight. It's not over, she whispered. No, Thomas agreed. But first round went to you. Joe approached, expression serious. We'll maintain patrols. State investigation will keep him busy, but be vigilant. The attorney offered her card. We'll need formal statements. There's a long process ahead. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah found herself alone with Thomas on the porch, the dust from the departing vehicles still hanging in the air. You stood your ground, Thomas said, pride evident in his voice. We did, Sarah corrected, realizing that for the first time in years, she hadn't faced her battles alone. The days following the confrontation unfolded in a strange mixture of tension and relief. Sarah found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, scanning the horizon for dust clouds that might signal Mark's return. Yet beneath the vigilance lay a newfound strength. She had faced her tormentor and held her ground. The children returned from the reservation that evening, Emma bubbling with stories of traditional cooking lessons, Michael clutching a small dream catcher made under patient guidance. Sarah held them tightly, inhaling their familiar scents, grateful they had been spared the confrontation. "Did Dad come?" Emma asked later, her intuition as sharp as ever. Sarah nodded, choosing honesty. "He did. But he left. There were lots of people here to help us." "Is he coming back?" Fear edged Emma's voice. "Not if the law works the way it should," Sarah answered. "And we have good people helping us make sure it does." That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found Thomas sitting on the porch steps, vigilant as always. "You should rest," she said, joining him in the cool evening air. Later, his eyes continued scanning the darkness beyond the property's lights. "He won't come back tonight," Sarah said. "Mark calculates risks. He'll regroup, plan his next move carefully." Thomas nodded. "Still better to watch." They sat in companionable silence until Sarah spoke again. "I never thanked you properly. For everything." "No need." "There is," she insisted. "You took in strangers. Put yourself between my family and danger. Offered us a future when we had none." Thomas turned to face her fully. "Long time ago, when Elena died, I shut everything out. Everyone, even family. Thought it was safer that way." He looked toward the stars. "Was wrong. Empty life isn't safe life. Just empty." Sarah understood the weight of this admission from such a private man. "And now house feels right with sounds in it. Even loud ones." His mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Your son asked me to teach him drumming yesterday. Used whole sentences." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "He did." Thomas nodded. "Healing happens in unexpected ways." The next morning brought Ms. Reynolds with updates. Mark had been formally served with both the protection order and administrative leave papers. The state investigation was proceeding, with multiple colleagues coming forward with accounts of concerning behavior. "It doesn't mean he's done fighting," Ms. Reynolds cautioned. "Men like Mark often escalate when they feel cornered. But his official power is diminished." She spread new papers across the kitchen table. "These are your options moving forward. Formalized custody arrangement. Supervised visitation possibilities. Or," she hesitated, "a complete termination of parental rights, though that's harder to achieve." Sarah stared at the documents, the legal pathways to freedom. "What would you recommend?" "Document everything. Build your case. And consider staying exactly where you are." Ms. Reynolds glanced around the kitchen. "You seem to have found a strong support system here." After she left, Thomas approached Sarah with a small box. "Thought it might be time for this." Inside lay an inexpensive camera. "For documenting your new start," he explained awkwardly. "If you decide to stay." That afternoon, they gathered on the porch, Sarah, Thomas, Emma, and Michael. David had brought over a tripod, and they positioned the camera carefully. "Our first family photo," Emma declared, arranging herself between Sarah and Thomas. Sarah started to correct her daughter's choice of words, then stopped. Family. The concept had been so poisoned by her years with Mark that she'd forgotten its true meaning. Looking at Thomas's weathered face, at her children's hopeful expressions, she felt the word reclaiming its proper significance. The timer beeped, counting down. Michael suddenly spoke, his voice stronger than it had been since the breaking. "Everyone smile." The shutter clicked, capturing the four of them in afternoon sunlight. Not perfect, not unblemished by their pasts, but together by choice rather than obligation or fear. Later, when Thomas developed the photo in his makeshift darkroom, Sarah studied their expressions. Emma's open delight, Michael's tentative smile, Thomas's dignified reserve softened around the edges, and her own face, a woman she barely recognized, with clear eyes and an expression of cautious hope. "It's a beginning," Thomas said, standing beside her. Sarah nodded. "A good one." Construction began in earnest as summer heat gave way to milder autumn temperatures. David arrived with a small crew of men from the reservation, unloading lumber and tools from battered pickup trucks. Thomas had finalized simple house plans drawn on graph paper: 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, a living area with large windows facing the sunrise. "Nothing fancy," he explained to Sarah as they reviewed the blueprint, "but solid, built to last." Sarah traced the outline with her finger. "It's perfect." Work progressed rapidly. The foundation was reinforced, framework erected, walls raised. Each day brought visible progress. Thomas worked alongside the crew, his mechanical precision complementing their practiced efficiency. Sarah found unexpected pleasure in physical labor. She learned to measure twice and cut once, to distinguish between types of nails, to apply sealant with even strokes. The new calluses on her hands felt like badges of accomplishment. Emma appointed herself assistant to anyone who would allow it, carrying tools, holding measuring tapes, absorbing construction terminology like a sponge. Michael, still selective with his words but speaking more each day, showed particular interest in the traditional building techniques Thomas's cousins incorporated into the modern structure. "Adobe bricks here," Thomas explained to the boy one afternoon, pointing to a section of wall. "Way my grandfather built. Keeps cool in summer, warm in winter." Michael nodded solemnly. "Can I help make them?" The simple question, offered without prompting, brought a rare smile to Thomas's face. "Tomorrow morning, early, before sun gets strong." Sarah watched as Thomas taught her son to mix clay, sand, and straw in precise proportions, to pack the mixture into wooden forms, to smooth the top with practiced motions. Michael's focus was absolute, his small hands mimicking Thomas's larger ones with careful precision. "He's good with his hands," Thomas observed later. "Patient, detail-oriented." "Like his teacher," Sarah replied softly. As the house took shape, Sarah began planning interior spaces. Emma helped design her bedroom, drawing pictures of where furniture would go, selecting colors from paint samples Thomas brought from town. "Purple," she declared firmly, "with stars on the ceiling." Sarah smiled at her daughter's confidence. "And what about Michael's room?" Emma considered seriously. "Blue, I think. He likes the sky." Sarah marveled at how well her children had adapted to this new life. The nightmares that had plagued Michael occurred less frequently. Emma's anxious questions about their father had gradually been replaced by excited planning for their future. Legal proceedings continued in parallel with construction. Sarah made weekly trips to the county seat with Joe or Ms. Reynolds, filing paperwork, giving depositions, building the case against Mark. The investigation into his professional conduct had expanded, with multiple colleagues coming forward with accounts of intimidation and evidence tampering. "He's fighting back," Ms. Reynolds warned during one meeting, "using every connection, every favor owed. But he's losing ground." Sarah returned from these meetings exhausted but resolute, finding solace in physical work on the house. One evening, as sunset painted the partially completed structure in gold and crimson, Thomas found Sarah standing alone inside what would become the kitchen. "Having doubts?" he asked, noticing her pensive expression. "No," she replied truthfully. "Just overwhelmed sometimes by how much has changed, how much is still changing." Thomas nodded, understanding. "Change is hard, even good change. A few months ago, I was running with no destination. Now I'm building a home." She turned to him. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate. No thanks needed between." He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Family?" Sarah suggested gently. Something shifted in Thomas's expression. Surprise, followed by cautious acceptance. "If that's what we're becoming." I think we already are, Sarah said. Not in any conventional way, but real all the same. They stood together in the golden light, surrounded by half-finished walls that already felt more like home than the suburban house Sarah had fled months ago. Later, as stars appeared above the still-missing roof, the children joined them for a picnic dinner on the plywood subfloor. Emma had helped prepare sandwiches. Michael carefully carried cups of lemonade without spilling. "When will our house be done?" Emma asked, biting into her sandwich. "Few more weeks," Thomas answered, "before first frost. And then we'll live here? Forever." The question held a child's concept of eternity. Sarah exchanged glances with Thomas. "That's the plan." "And Thomas will be next door?" Michael asked, his quiet voice steady. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "He'll be close by." "Good," Michael said simply. "He belongs with us." The straightforward declaration, from her once silent son, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. In the growing darkness, she reached for Thomas's hand, finding it already extended toward hers. The house was completed as the first frost silvered the desert landscape. Simple but solid, it stood as testament to communal effort and shared purpose. Sarah spent the final days arranging their few possessions, hanging curtains sewn by the women from the reservation, placing the children's drawings in frames Thomas had crafted. "Ready for housewarming," David announced after the last inspection. "Traditional Apache blessing would be good." Thomas nodded agreement. "My grandmother's sister is an elder. She would perform it if you're comfortable with that," he added, looking to Sarah. "I'd be honored," she replied, touched by the inclusion in his heritage. The ceremony took place at dawn. Mary Redwater, a dignified woman in her 80s, arrived with several family members. She carried sage, cedar, and a small drum. Thomas had explained the ritual beforehand: a cleansing of the space, prayers for protection and prosperity, a welcoming of good spirits into the new home. Mary spoke in Apache, her weathered hands making graceful gestures toward each cardinal direction. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, their intent resonated clearly. This wasn't just a house being blessed, but a new beginning being honored. After the ceremony, Mary approached Sarah, studying her face with knowing eyes. "You have strong spirit," she said in accented English. "Had to be, to survive what you did." She pressed something into Sarah's hand, a beautifully woven ceremonial blanket with intricate geometric patterns. "For your family," Mary explained. "Design shows 4 directions, 4 seasons, circle of life. Very old pattern. Very good medicine." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." "Not for treasuring," Mary corrected with a slight smile. "For using. For wrapping children when sick. For sitting under stars. For living." The gathering evolved into an impromptu celebration. People from the reservation arrived throughout the day, each bringing something: food, plants for the garden, handcrafted items for the home. Children played in the yard. The aroma of traditional dishes mingled with laughter and conversation. Sarah found herself surrounded by more genuine community than she'd experienced in years of suburban isolation. These people had accepted her family without question, incorporating them into their circle with generosity that humbled her. Emma thrived in the attention, proudly showing visitors her room with its purple walls and star-speckled ceiling. Michael remained quieter but engaged, particularly with the older men who shared stories and skills he absorbed with solemn attention. Thomas moved through the gathering with surprising ease for a man who had lived in solitude for so long. Sarah watched him interact with relatives, noting how his usual reserve softened among them. "You've brought him back to us," Mary commented, following Sarah's gaze. 15 years, he kept everyone away. Now look." In the afternoon, Joe arrived with significant news. "Mark's been indicted," he informed Sarah quietly. "Multiple charges. Evidence tampering. Witness intimidation. Abuse of power." Sarah steadied herself against the kitchen counter. What does that mean for us? It means he's fighting for his freedom now, not for custody, Joe replied. His attention is diverted to saving himself. Relief washed through her, tempered by caution. He'll still blame me. Yes, Joe acknowledged, but his weapons are fewer now, and your position is stronger. He handed her an envelope. Judge granted your petition for full custody. No visitation rights pending criminal proceedings. Sarah opened the document with trembling fingers, reading the official language that formalized her children's safety. Tears blurred her vision. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Thank Thomas, Joe replied. He's the one who called me that first day, said there was a family in need of protection, said he couldn't do it alone. The admission surprised Sarah. Thomas had never mentioned making that call. As evening approached, the gathering began to disperse. Families departed with warm embraces and promises to return soon. Mary placed her hands on Emma and Michael's heads in a final blessing before leaving. Eventually, only Thomas remained, helping Sarah clean up the remnants of the celebration. Your family is wonderful, Sarah said as they worked side by side. Our family now, Thomas corrected quietly. If you want it to be. Sarah paused, dish towel in hand. Is that what you want? Thomas met her eyes directly. Haven't wanted anything this much since Elena died. The simple honesty of his statement required no elaborate response. Sarah moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. He stood still for a moment, then carefully put his arm around her. Outside, the desert twilight wrapped the two houses in gentle shadows, the old and the new, standing together on the same land. Through the window, Sarah could see Emma teaching Michael a string game she'd learned from one of the tribal children. Yes, she said simply. That's what I want too. 1 year later, the homestead had transformed. Gardens flourished where bare earth had been. The new house stood weathered enough to look as if it had always belonged. A workshop had been added behind it, Sarah's bakery, where she created goods sold at the reservation market and increasingly, to specialty shops in town. Thomas's once isolated home had evolved too. The porch had been expanded to accommodate family gatherings. Inside, photographs and children's artwork adorned walls previously left bare. Elena's quilt now draped permanently across the back of the sofa. No longer a painful reminder, but an honored connection to the past. On the anniversary of their arrival, Thomas suggested a trip. Time the children saw something beyond the desert, he said, helping Sarah load a picnic into their newly purchased used Jeep. Emma, now 11, bubbled with excitement about the mountain lake that was their destination. Michael, 8, and speaking with the thoughtful deliberation that had become his hallmark, packed field guides for identifying wildlife. We need the new suitcase, he announced, retrieving the practical luggage they'd purchased for family excursions. So different from the battered case that had contained their desperate flight. Sarah watched her children prepare, marveling at their resilience. Emma had thrived at the reservation school, forming friendships and developing a passion for traditional crafts. Michael had gradually emerged from his protective silence, his bond with Thomas growing through shared activities and quiet conversations. Mark remained a shadow in their past, serving time for his crimes. The legal battles had concluded with full termination of his parental rights, a rare outcome that reflected the severity of his actions and the testimony of multiple witnesses who had finally found courage to speak. Ready? Thomas asked, appearing at Sarah's side. The months had softened the edges of his solitude. He smiled more easily now, laughed occasionally, most often at Emma's determined humor. Almost, Sarah replied, finishing her packing. Their relationship had evolved with deliberate patience. Neither rushed nor forced, it had grown naturally from mutual respect into something deeper. They had married in a small ceremony 3 months earlier, blending Apache traditions with Sarah's family customs. As they prepared to leave, A vehicle approached on the access road. Sarah tensed momentarily. Old reflexes died hard, but relaxed when she recognized Joe's truck. "Perfect timing," Thomas commented. "Was going to call him before we left." Joe brought news and paperwork. "Adoption documents," he explained, handing Thomas a folder. "Judge signed off yesterday. Officially legal now." The children gathered around as Thomas opened the folder. Inside lay the formal declaration of adoption. Thomas Redwater was now legally Emma and Michael's father. "Does this mean we have your name now?" Emma asked. "If you want it," Thomas replied carefully. "Or keep your mother's. Your choice." "Redwater," Michael said decisively. "I want to be a Redwater." Emma nodded agreement. "Me too. We're Redwaters now." Sarah blinked back tears as she watched Thomas kneel to embrace them both. The journey from "one of you can stay" to this moment of complete belonging stretched beyond measure. As they finally departed for their trip, Sarah found herself thinking of that first evening, the desperate mother with a dusty suitcase, the wary man testing her character with an impossible choice. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas said as they drove, children chattering in the back seat. "I was remembering the day we arrived," Sarah replied. "How terrified I was. How I thought you were cruel when you said only one of us could stay." Thomas's expression grew reflective. "Wasn't testing you," he admitted. "Was testing myself. Needed to know if I could still recognize goodness when I saw it. If I could still trust my judgment. And you chose your children without hesitation. Showed me everything I needed to know about who you were." His hand found hers between the seats. "Best test I ever failed." The Jeep crested a hill, revealing the vast landscape stretching before them. Behind lay the home they had built together. Not just physical structures, but the harder architecture of trust, healing, and chosen family. In the back seat, Emma had her arm around Michael as they watched for wildlife. The new suitcase sat between them, packed for a journey of exploration rather than escape. "Thomas," Sarah said as the road unwound before them. Thank you for making us decide." He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for deciding to stay." The desert sun caught the simple gold bands on their fingers as the family continued forward. The road ahead open with possibility, the path behind complete in its circle.